Okay, so I thought I'd start with some just giving a brief outline what I'll be discussing today, and also some context. So, as Fujimoto-san just pointed out, COP26 has begun, and the global nuclear lobby will be very active in trying to convince the world that nuclear power is the way out of the climate crisis. And of course, there are many reasons why we shouldn't believe them. And the plan, what we're discussing today, this plan to dump the radioactive contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean is one of those reasons. It's one example of the irresponsibility and the disregard for health and environment that we so often see in the nuclear industry. So with that context, I will be covering 3 points today. The current status of the contaminated water at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, which even 10 years later is still very much an ongoing problem. One of the problems is issues with the filtering system that is being used to filter this water. It's called the ALPS system, so I'll be discussing that. And then I'll also be talking about some updates on the current plan to dump this water. And also I'll be talking about alternatives and some more of the protest, which we've seen a lot of already, but some more of the protest details. Okay, so what is in these tanks? What do they actually contain? Basically, this water, the 1.28 million tons of this contaminated water. It's water that has been used to cool the melted down fuel. And if it's not constantly cooled, even over 10 years later, it could again become critical and a nuclear reaction could happen. So it has to be constantly cooled. Also groundwater flows into the site. TEPCO's tried to stop with this with various methods. They have an ice wall and other things, but this has not been 100% effective. So there's still groundwater and also rainwater, which comes through the roof. I think I missed a slide, so I'm going to go back. Sorry. This is an aerial view of the Fukushima area, and you can see the reason I remembered was because this is the reactor buildings, unit 1 to 4, and it's probably hard to see on the screen, but as they suffered hydrogen explosions, there's not very much of them left. So the roof is not very intact, which is why rainwater gets through it. But you can see, so this is the area of the 4 of the 6 reactors at the plant. But this is the area where all the tanks are. So obviously it is a very large area which contains all that water. So getting back to the details of what's in the tanks. Yeah, so this is why there's so much water. And the thing is that it still increases daily by 140 tons. So it's not like all the water that's there, if they just keep that, it'll be fine. It keeps increasing. So this is why nuclear accidents are an ongoing problem, that they don't just end immediately. The amount of tritium which is contained in these tanks, in terms of its radioactivity, there's 860 trillion becquerels of tritium. Now, the point with tritium, as has been mentioned, is that it can't be filtered out. So what TEPCO has said they will do, so at the moment, this 860 trillion becquerels is the equivalent of 730,000 becquerels per litre. And TEPCO has said that they will dilute this to 1,500 becquerels per litre before it's dumped into the ocean. But we have to remember that any dilution, it's not actually changing the quantity of the radionuclides. It doesn't actually wash them away. they are there for as long as their half-life dictates. So even though this is going to be diluted, this 860 trillion becquerels of tritium is going to end up in the ocean over a long period of time. But even if it's diluted, that really doesn't solve the problem. The water also contains another 62 radionuclides, including all of cesium 134 and 137, and 62 other ones other than tritium. The thing is that these 62 radionuclides are supposed to be filtered out by ALPS, the Advanced Liquid Processing System, which TEPCO decided to install in 2012. Now, this system is supposed to filter out most of these other 62 radioactive substances, but it can't filter out tritium. But the point is that actually in 71%, this is a graph provided by TEPCO, and even though all of the water in the tanks has been through the ALPS filtration, only 29% of it actually is of a standard, meets the regulatory standards. 71% of it, the ALPS system didn't even filter out the other 62 nuclides. It can't filter out tritium, but it didn't even filter out the others. So this 71% of the water in the tanks has to be repurified. And this hopefully will remove the other radionuclides to a regulatory standard, but it's not zero. So apart from the 860 trillion becquerels of tritium, there will also be more radioactive particles which will also be released. So we have to also keep that in mind. The latest plan, which was announced in August this year, was that a 1 kilometer undersea tunnel will be constructed, and the contaminated water will be released through that tunnel. Now, TEPCO claims that this 1 kilometer tunnel will make the water be released in an area where there are no fishing rights. And as the fishing unions, as has already been mentioned by Muto-san, the fishing unions have been vehemently against this plan right from the beginning. And I have to say that this announcement of the 1 kilometer undersea tunnel hasn't changed that at all. Even if it goes to an area where there's no fishing rights, it will of course travel. It's not going to stay there. The water will permeate throughout the whole ocean. So the fishermen aren't placated as maybe TEPCO thought they would be. The other claim is that it's easier to dilute the water if it's further out to sea. This is certainly true. If it's released on the coast, then it's brought back by waves. And there's also a danger that the water they use to dilute will also be contaminated. So the idea that taking it further out to sea will certainly help with the dilution. But as I mentioned, diluting the water doesn't actually get rid of the radioactivity. The other perhaps surreptitious kind of underground reason for building the tunnel is that it will be much harder for media and citizens to monitor and to actually see. It'll be harder it won't make a news story. It'll be much easier for TEPCO to keep this whole thing out of the public eye. So I'm sure that's also one of their reasons. I have to say that there are many protests, as we've seen internationally and also within Japan. And there's many alternatives which have been proposed to this plan. The Citizens Commission on Nuclear Energy, CCNE, has made concrete proposals for alternatives to dumping this water a long time ago. Like, it's not a plan that's just come up recently. They have proposed this for a while. And the first point is that we can keep storing this water it needs to be in more robust and more appropriate containers. But now that it is stored, keeping it stored is certainly a viable option. Another proposal is to solidify it with cement and then bury it. This technology already exists and it's in practice in the US. So it's something that can be implemented immediately. It's not something that has to be developed. What could be developed and what's being worked on already is technology for separating tritium. Maybe in the future, it may be possible to do this, and then that technology could be used to actually remove the tritium. So there are concrete alternatives to this proposal. They just have been ignored by TEPCO. As I think Mari mentioned, Gensui King and CNIC, along with 6 other NPOs, have had negotiations 4 times since last year with various government ministries on this issue, and many issues were discussed. Some of our main points were that releasing this water will be a violation of the London Protocol, which is a treaty that protects the marine environment from waste dumping. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in typical bureaucratic fashion, came up with all sorts of technical arguments saying that it wasn't a violation because it would be out to sea, it's not on the coast, and various other technical loopholes. We also claimed that this is a violation of the promise made by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI, which is the ministry that's in charge of the nuclear industry, in 2015, that the water would not be released without the agreement of all affected parties. And they made this promise, but now, as we've already seen, there is so many affected parties that are completely opposed to this plan, yet the government has forced it through and announced that this is what they'll be doing. METI's answer to this in the negotiations was, oh, we've still got 2 years, so we'll be able to convince everyone in the next 2 years. Doesn't seem likely, but yeah, that's their excuse. I'd like to end with this. Oh yeah, I keep skipping slides, sorry. So why is the government so intent on dumping this water despite all of these protests? The government and TEPCO reasons, firstly, they say there's not enough space on the site. But this is largely because they have plans to recover the melted down fuel, which is still somewhere in the reactors. And in fact, whether they can do this or not is anybody's guess. They have robots and things, because it's still obviously much too radioactive for any human being to go anywhere near. So they've sent robots in to take photos and try and figure out where this melted down fuel is and what it looks like, what sort of state it's in. Even the robots die. So it doesn't seem likely that this is really going to happen in the near future. And even if they did manage to recover this fuel, what would they do with it? Like it's really the whole roadmap of the decommissioning of Fukushima Daiichi really needs to be discussed more openly, and there needs to be much more realistic kind of proposals. And if the idea is to just dump all the water because they need to make space for this hypothetical melted down fuel, it's not a good enough reason. The claim also on the part of TEPCO and the government is that it's the most practical solution. Practical for who? Basically, it's the cheapest solution for TEPCO, but they're the perpetrators. They're the reason why this happened in the first place. They're the cause of the accident. So surely the people who have been affected by the accident should have a say in what the best solution is. But they've basically been ignored, and the people who caused the accident, they've got the solution that's best for them, which hardly seems fair at all. And again, this argument that the water will be diluted so it's safe. I'm sure Dr. Fairley will tell us more about the safety of tritium. But really, there's a safety myth, which the global nuclear industry, it's in their vital interest that this myth is kept alive, because nuclear power plants all around the world, and especially reprocessing facilities, release huge amounts of tritium just routinely. And so if TEPCO was to admit that this tritium is unsafe, it would send ripples really around the whole global industry. So upholding this safety myth is also another thing that we need to take into consideration. And this map is a world map that was also released by TEPCO as part of their documents. And it shows, it's probably pretty hard to see on the screen, but it shows the amount of tritium that is released annually by various nuclear facilities around the world. And we see here the UK Sellafield reprocessing facility releases about 423 terabecquerels every year. And compared to that, Fukushima Daiichi will only release 2.2 terabecquerels. So the argument by TEPCO is that, see, it's hardly anything at all. And all of these places all around the world are all releasing this tritium, and it's all fine. So this is their argument. But really, I think the message from COP26 is that releasing all this CO2 and everyone saying it's okay to release this and releasing it all over these years has got us into this mess. And we really, this idea that we can just pump all this poison into the environment and leave it for future generations to deal with, this age is over. And we really need to think of better alternatives. Okay, so thank you for listening.
Our first question is to Dr. Caitlin Stronell. Several countries threaten to challenge the dumping decision in international court systems. Is there any court action being taken now by South Korea, China, or other Pacific Rim countries? And in regard to that, some countries threaten to protest at the WTO. Is this being done?
Okay, several countries did threaten to challenge the dumping decision in the international court systems. But at this point, none of them have actually gone ahead with that. And as far as I know, there's no protests at the WTO either.
All right, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. About the underground pipes, how many underground pipes are being built to dump the wastewater?
Actually, the construction and the design of this whole underground tunnel project hasn't been released yet, so we haven't really seen the plans. So really the emission method is still under consideration, so we can't really tell how many underground pipes there'll be yet.
All right, thank you very much. Is there going to be independent monitoring of the wastewater's contamination of the ocean, and which agencies are going to monitor the dumping?
Yeah, so TEPCO, in fact, there's not any independent monitoring yet. Like, they haven't actually announced an organization, but they have said that measurement and evaluation by a third-party organization is also available. So it hasn't actually been announced yet, but there seems to be a door open, or at least they're saying it's open. And the Japan Nuclear Regulation Authority will definitely be monitoring the dumping. But as we know with nuclear regulation authorities, sometimes they can't be 100% reliable. I wouldn't call that an independent organization. So this is an area that, we really have to be careful about.
I see, thank you. What kind of radioactive isotopes are going to be looked for in the monitoring by the Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority? Right.
So in the slide that I showed before, the 62 isotopes, which is the ALPS target nuclides, will be monitored, as well as, of course, tritium and carbon-14.
Right. Thank you very much. Are the raw data from all radiation tests of tank water and seawater at and near Fukushima Daiichi plant available for public review?
Basically, yes. They are supposed to be. There is information which is available for public review, but it's hard to tell if TEPCO has released all of the information. There's some up there, but whether it's complete is not 100% sure.
Right. Has an independent scientific team collected radiation data in the past 2 to 5 years? And if so, is that data available for public review?
There's a group called Minna no Data, and it's an independent NGO with scientists and experts, and they've been collecting information and data, and that is available on their website.
Thank you very much. What, if any, marine life samples have been collected to test for radiation exposure beyond testing of commercial fishing catches?
TEPCO and the government fisheries agency test life sample, marine life. They take samples periodically. So those tests are being conducted.
Thank you. Are you aware that the past year's salmon run numbers were incredibly low and the weight and size of the few returning salmon to Northern California were greatly diminished?
Yeah, I didn't know that about California. In fact, we see that phenomenon in Japan as well. And in Japan, the scientists blame it on global warming. Again, you know, how far we can trust that is a different matter, but there definitely needs to be more research on why this is happening. It's a global kind of, a phenomenon, so it definitely needs to be looked into.
Right. Another question from the chat. What is the proportionate impact of the threatened 860 trillion becquerels to what has already been emitted? And is there anyone measuring changes in radiation levels in living sea organism where bioconcentration could multiply the proportion found in the seawater itself? Are any such tests being conducted along the shores of North or South America?
I'm not sure about that. I think that regarding the dangers, probably Dr. Fairley might be able to answer that better, but I don't have specific information about North America, I'm afraid.
I see. Dr. Fairley, would you like to chime in?
Yeah. Well, TEPCO and the Japanese government have said that they're going to reduce the concentration down to 1,500 becquerels per liter. They say they're going to do that. I rather privately doubt that. So the answer to the question is, the effect would depend on what the concentrations would be after they have dumped stuff into the Pacific Ocean. Really hard to tell. The questioner wants to know what the effect would be before and after. Very difficult to say, I'm afraid, right now. What we can say in general terms is they shouldn't do it. Absolutely. The effects could be very bad or just bad. That's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you very much. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Stronell?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking to Ian's concept of the precautionary principle. We shouldn't be doing anything that it could be dangerous. And yeah, that's really, I think, the guiding principle in this case.
Yes, thank you so much for the importance of using the precautionary principle when we don't have the clear evidence that things are safe. Yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. Next question, could somebody please sit on Jim Hansen? Sadly, I hear many young people fired up about climate catastrophe who advocate for extended permits for old nukes and building new nukes, citing Dr. Hansen as their basis for that. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I do. And that is that Dr. Hansen, although he is a well-respected guru on climate change, he should stick to climate change because he really doesn't know about the dangers of radiation and radioactivity. So therefore, when it comes to his comments about nuclear power, we should disregard them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just think that there's so many reasons why nuclear is just not the answer to climate change. And apart from the fact that it's just going to take too long to build all of the nuclear reactors that we need to replace carbon, and it's too expensive and it's just not realistic. And anyway, the people in the carbon debate talk about climate justice and not passing on these legacies to future generations. Well, I mean, the legacy of nuclear waste is really, it's totally unfair. I mean, that's, if you're talking about justice, there just isn't any in nuclear power. So
thank you very much for, oh yes.
Can I add something? I often get asked questions about Dr. Hansen, and let me put it to you this way. If ever I met him at a scientific conference, I would say, hello, Dr. Hansen, you should really Google uranium mining. And then I would walk away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really important that we also talk about environmental injustice surrounding the nuclear fuel chain, including uranium minings, processing, milling, enriching, and also issues on nuclear waste, because we don't have technology or solution to deal with the high-level radioactive waste coming from Fukushima or any other power plants. And we're dealing with tons of high-level, highly radioactive spent fuel coming from regular nuclear reactors. And we are just waiting until one of our children will be smart enough to come up with a solution. So thank you so much, Dr. Fioli and Dr. Stronell, for your comments. Let's move on to the next question. This one is about petitions to the UN on this topic of dumping. Any other developments thus far engaging the global community to speak up to the UN? I heard that the youth declaration prepared by RTT's youth committee was shared to UN member states at the United Nations in New York City. Other than that, does anyone have any insights as to this question? All right. So I think the answer is no, except for the youth declaration. Let me see. Let me see whether we have more questions. There are provisions in any international trade agreements that could be invoked to persuade Japan not to proceed with this planned radiation dump? Well, Japan is saying that their plan to build tunnels will not violate the London Protocol, which is the international treaty to protect marine environment. So they're very sneaky about what they're doing, and they insist that using a tunnel will not be considered dumping under this London Protocol. So we have to continue to raise voices against such claim. And there, as Dr. Stronell mentioned in her presentation, that they're going to continue gaining understandings from local communities on this dumping plan, which means that they're going to spend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money for PR campaign that this plant is safe to the ocean. So we have to collaborate together to delay this process and ultimately stop this dumping plan. Any comments on this regarding what we can do? Any recommendations for action to stop this plan?
I always try to think that, you know, Japan is, the Japanese government is kind of sensitive to gaiatsu, to pressure from foreign countries. But yeah, it needs to be really at like a government at a high level. So yeah, kind of working on governments in each country to protest at a high level, I think could be one effective way to try and sway the Japanese government. I remember when we were working on plutonium, one of the things that really helped was getting the US to say to the Japanese government, you've got too much plutonium and it's really a threat, you know, to the region. And so that was effective in some ways. But yeah, sort of trying to convince individual governments of different countries. Sometimes the Japanese government is more sensitive to outside pressure than its own citizens. So that's something for the international community to certainly work on.
Marisha or Kiana, would you like to chime in anything from your perspective? If so, please mute yourself. We can put you in the spotlight if you like. Otherwise, we can move on.
I can add something to
let me put you in the spotlight then. Hold on a second.
So just to add on to what Caitlin said about taking this to the higher up governments, besides having our youth declaration shared to members of the UN during our conference on the crisis of nuclear dumping, there was a question asked to one of the UN ambassadors, Ambassador Sito from Kiribati, whether this issue could be taken up to the UN Security Council because it does threaten our livelihoods. And he did say that that is an option, and also a suggestion would be for governments to create a coalition in order for the international community to hear our concerns.
Thank you so much, Kiana. I think we answered all the questions. Anyone, any speakers would like to add last words or?
Yes, could I
yes, please.
answer a question from Sally Jones? She asks, what's the prospect of finding a way to remove tritium from contaminated water? Well, the answer to that is there aren't any prospects. I've studied this matter, and that although there have been many suggestions, they're all highly impractical. In the world, there's only one plant that I'm aware of that actually does separate tritium from water, but it's extremely expensive, highly inefficient. For example, each pass will remove 0.5% of the tritium involved, so you need to process it hundreds of times to get any effective removal rates. And this is in Canada. So the prospects of removing technological means of removing tritium from water are practically nil. I have, in my website, I have recommended that what the Japanese government and TEPCO should do is that there is lots of land near Fukushima, and they should build more tanks and store it and keep storing it. And my final point would be that how long did they have to store it for? Well, the half-life is 12 years, so take 10 half-lives as being a rough guide. That's 120 years. This gives lots of time to Japanese politicians to consider the wisdom of their energy policy choices.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the guest speakers.